Austin. I loved Steve Austin. I still love Steve Austin. You know, being a wrestling fan as a kid, growing up, you know, I can be a fan of pro wrestlers the way you guys are. I mean, just because I know them doesn't mean I can't be a fan still for them. And I always thought that my favorite wrestler of all time would be Steve Austin. He was, if I'd been a little kid growing up, I would have really been a Steve Austin fan for sure. He was just a great character and a great wrestler. But I will say about Steve that when I first met him, he was pretty nervous and pretty erratic sometimes in the ring, and he seemed to get flustered. Sometimes he would get going so fast in the ring, he'd forget what he was doing. And when that happened, it was a big problem because he would, when he derailed and completely threw the whole script out the window and the whole match and everything he planned out, because it would just get erased in his head. As soon as he tripped up one little thing, it's like one little note or one little bar in music, and then he didn't know how to play the rest of the song anymore, and and that made it hard with Steve, because sometimes he would just forget everything and go kind of ballistic in there, and you'd have to get him back on track. And I was good at that. I was able to calm him down, sometimes right in the middle of the ring, and just say, okay, relax, take it easy, stop and think about it, and everything's okay. Nobody knows you screw up sometimes in wrestling except for you and the guy you're working with. But the most fans are, most of the time don't even quite get it yet, that something's wrong. But a lot of times that would happen with Steve. And I helped, I think, settle him down as a professional. And I think the matches that I had with Steve really prepared him for the road ahead in the next couple of years when he became the great champion that he was. I'd like to talk about the Wrestlemania match that we had, because it was such a great match. I think the Wembley match is my favorite match in a lot of ways because of how hard I worked. I thought I did the work for two people that match, and Kerry Davey. The Iron Man match with Shawn Michaels was another one that was just a very flawless, great performance on both parts, and a great match, and a amazing performance. And there's a lot to love about that match. But the match at WrestleMania 13 with Steve Austin, I always loved that match for a lot of different reasons, because it, when I watch MMA and I watch UFC and that kind of violence, I always, I just hate the idea of, like, if I couldn't imagine punching Steve Austin's face in and trying, like a UFC fighter does, or breaking somebody's arm in a match, or some of the things that these guys do in MMA and UFC. So brutal. Wrestlers, a lot of times, are friends, and we have a lot of love and respect for each other. And when I wrestled Steve Austin at WrestleMania 13, we weren't that excited about wrestling with each other. I had fully anticipated working with Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 13, and I was fully expecting him to give me that belt back, and that was the way it was planned, and that all got shelved about a month before WrestleMania. And it was very sort of last minute. They go, okay, Bret Hart and Steve Austin. And me and Steve were more like, because we loved working with each other and loved our chemistry and all that. But I remember we were like, well, we just split Survivor Series. Like, this is not a new matchup. It's kind of, we did everything we could think of in that Survivor Series match. And we didn't have a whole lot I didn't think anyway, or beforehand. We didn't really know what we were going to do in the ring that would make it a better match. It was kind of like, what are we going to do now? We did everything in November. And so I remember that day we went out to the ring and we sat around on the ring apron and we're like, so what are we going to do? And Steve wasn't very excited about it, and I was kind of like, what are we going to do? And I remember we just started talking. I remember we got in the ring and I said, this is what we should do. if this thing was a real fight, and all the things that have been happening in the storyline where he cost me the Rumble and he'd been jumping me at every time I turned around, he cost me the title against Sid. So we had a lot of little heat things where I was pretty, storyline-wise, I was pretty mad at him and should want to beat the crap out of him at WrestleMania pretty good. And so we started to map out that match and to just talk it out, and it's amazing how it turned out to be such a great match. I know in the match with Steve that nobody really expected it to be the match that it was. But when we went out earlier in the night when we were planning all this stuff, I had said to Steve Austin, I said, Steve, you know what would really make this match? I said, if you could get a little blood in this match. And I remember Steve said, I've never cut myself or bled in a match like on purpose, like he'd never done it before, never cut his head with a razor blade. He said, I've never done it before, but damn it, I'll do it today, I'll try, or something like that. And I remember I stopped him, I said, Steve, you can't practice at WrestleMania. It's not a place where you practice things like that. You have to. So I looked at him, I said, Steve, I would never tell you this, and I would tell everybody that it's a wrestler to never trust anyone to do this to you. But I remember I told Steve, I said, let me do it. I'll do it. I'll do it right. You don't be fumbling around there and trying to experiment. You've never done it before. It's the wrong place to practice. And I'll give Steve Austin credit. He looked at me and said, okay. And I told him, I said, Steve, because in those days there was a lot of, you get a lot of trouble for blood. There was a really strict no blood rule, not just to the wrestlers, but to the network and the wrestling, the television people. And it was a strict rule for quite some time that there was to be no blood in any matches. And so I told Steve, because he really could get in a lot of trouble. I told him, I said, look, if you change your mind and you don't want to do it, and you're worried that it might get you in a lot of trouble, just tell me and we'll scratch the whole thing. We won't do it. And so in those days, I took this razor blade and you cut it into little pieces and you put a little piece in your, I used to always keep them right here in my upper lip. I just stick it up there and it would just sit there. And I told Steve, I said, Steve, once I spit it out, like when I cough it up and spit it out in the ring, and then I got to get it in my hand without anybody seeing, it's got to be in my hand, and you're punching guys and you're throwing them around and stuff. It's not easy to carry a razor blade in your hand when you're having a pro wrestling match. But I told him, I said, once I get it in my hand, like you're good till I spit it out. Once I spit it out, I don't care what you tell me. You're going to be bleeding all over the place when this thing's over. And it still makes me laugh because I remember somewhere, and I can't remember the exact spot. I know Steve sidestepped me and I think threw me out of the ring, but we were going into a spot where he was throwing me in the ropes. And I asked him if he wanted to do it, and he said, okay, let's do it. And then as he threw me off, and started to throw me out of the ring and sidestepped me, he changed his mind as he was throwing me out on the floor. He goes, maybe we better not. And he threw me on the floor, and I was like, I remember when he came out on the floor to get me, he started to throw me into the railing, and I started to reverse him into the railing. And I remember going, it's too late. It's too late. And I threw him into the fence. And it's an amazing thing to describe. But I mean, because it's all in hindsight now. But I remember I can get a lot of trouble for this. You know, in a lot of ways, I might have got fired for it, or fined a lot of money, and it was a big chance for both of us to take because we didn't get permission for any of this stuff. And threw Steve Austin into the railing, and he's hit the railing pretty hard. And a lot of people probably thought he cut his head there, or that he did it himself, or what. But if you ever watch that match, I come over, I step right over top behind him, grab him his head so he wouldn't move around or squirm, and I cut his head right in front of Vince McMahon, who was about as far away as John, watching me. And there's about, I don't know how many thousand people were on that side of the building watching. Oh, and then the cameras are all on me. And I cut Steve Austin's head with a razor blade. I just clamped him and just gave this little cut, and it was perfect. It was about the size of your baby fingernail or a piggy bank. You could put like a dime in his head. And it bled everywhere. It was funny because even after that match, Steve Austin had to put a big Band-Aid on his head. He had a Band-Aid about this big because he didn't want anyone to see how small it was. It was like a little tiny scratch, you know. And anyway, he bled all over the match, and it was just great. And I remember thinking, I don't know what that match would be today if there wasn't blood. It was, I think that made Steve Austin's career. And that was the whole idea behind it, that would turn that sympathy and turn that story around where they were for him now and not for me. And that was what we were trying to do. And I think I was smarter than Vince McMahon in the sense that I knew what we needed to do to get Steve Austin where he needed to be, and I took it upon myself to do whatever I needed to help Steve Austin get over that day. And there's things in that match that I just love. I love when Steve Austin, I remember beating him, punching him, and punching the crap out of him in the corner, and out of nowhere he just kind of kicks me right in the crotch. And have you ever watched that? Is that it there? Yeah.
I think one or two might have done somehow.
Right there. I mean, that, you know, usually when you see a guy take a ball shot in wrestling, it usually makes guys, a lot of times it's a comedy, or you start laughing and you go, that was kind of, like, it doesn't, that looked like it killed somebody. And it was brilliant. I always go, that was brilliant psychology. And there's a lot of things in talking about this match while it's on, but it was such a great match. I mean, I know Steve Austin, he'll call me up sometimes and go, I got our match on right now, and I can't, you know, and he gets so excited talking about it, and he just, it's the only match I ever watch back. And, you know, I watch it back a lot, and I always love it. And there's a part in this match where, I'll probably talk about it. I'll see if I can drag this thing out till it comes. But Steve Austin, he was a great wrestler, and he totally trusted me in this match. And you know, he was ready to take the top spot, and it was a real honor for me to work with him back then and to help establish him. And I always thought this is the match that made Steve Austin. And don't get me wrong, I know Steve Austin would have been a great star with or without Bret Hart, but because he was just that good of a wrestler and he has that talented. But I think I helped steer him exactly where he needed to go, and I think he's always appreciated that it was Bret Hart that kind of shined the light in the beginning for him to see where he needed to go. And in this match, there's the bell on the apron. We had to come up with a spot, and this is what I love about some of the things I did in the ring, that it was so natural. You don't really sense that the bell, which you see it right there on the ring. Steve Austin threw me out of the ring on the wrong side of the bell in the first place, and I had to, where I'm positioned right there is where I had to get to. And if you watch that back, I come back to the right place and save the match. And I hit Steve with the bell, and I never even touched him with the bell. It would just look like I did, but actually when I swung it back, I thought it looked really bad, and I was worried because I never actually touched him with the bell, I don't think. But and this here scene, I remember telling Steve Austin when I put him in the Sharpshooter, I said, when I put this on and crank it up and you push up and push out and I fall over on this is all really good psychology, because he's going to power out. And at that time, nobody had ever got out of the Sharpshooter except for Davey at Wembley, and he only got out because he grabbed the ropes. This is the match where I let Steve kick out, not nuts, but he slowly counters the Sharpshooter here, and just when everybody thinks he's going to get out of it, I put him back in, and that's how we end the match. If you see Steve's head, it's a little tiny cat scratch on his forehead. Look, if he wipes it away, there's nothing there. And people always talk about capsules and stuff like that in wrestling. You can never have a blood capsule in a wrestling match because it just wipes off and then there's nothing there. You have to have a continual bloodline. And if you see him wipe his head, there's nothing. There's a little tiny cut. But see, when he pushes me over here and pushes me out, that part right there, I always think that's so brilliant because I end up putting him back in the sharpshooter. I remember when I described it to Steve, I said it's like in that movie The Cuckoo's Nest when Jack Nicholson's trying to pick that big sink up and throw it through the window. I don't know if you remember that old movie, but he tries really hard and he can't quite pick it up, and he finally gives up and looks at everybody and goes, well, at least I tried, damn it. And that's the same kind of psychology that's in that spot right there where Steve kicks out, but he doesn't quite get out, and I put him in the hold. And I believe all those things are what made Steve Austin that day, and they were, I think they were brilliant psychology, little things in that match that that make that match just a great match. And I always say, you know, like you watch UFC and you watch these guys beat the daylights out of each other and bash brain cells and break limbs and cartilage, and you know, it's a very animal way to make a living, if you ask me. But in this match and throughout my career, I can honestly say that no animals were harmed in the making of that movie. And